We've got new reports to tell you about that suggest that Ukrainians' determination to save their country is meeting with real, tangible success. Here's an example. Forbes is now reporting that the Ukrainian military has more tanks than when the war started, mainly from capturing Russian troops. This new report adds to a litany of setbacks for Russian forces as the war rages on. The New York Times investigations team has kind of pulled back the curtain on Russia's invasion by analyzing intercepted radio communications of Russian forces that illustrate the realities on the ground. Soldiers struggling with a lack of fuel, water, and food supplies, desperate and disorganized, and even showing potential war crimes being committed. Take a listen.
Было принято решение убрать первое хозяйство от населенного пункта и накрыть населенный пункт артиллерией. Прием. Медленнее, говори еще раз, повтори. Убрать первое хозяйство от населенного пункта и накрыть населенный пункт артиллерией.
Cover the residential area with artillery. Joining our conversation, MSNBC national security analyst Clint, former consultant to the FBI's Counterterrorism Division, now with the Foreign Policy Research Institute, and retired four-star General Barry McCaffrey is with us, a former member of the National Security Council and now an MSNBC analyst. So, Clint, what was your first reaction when you heard these radio transmissions?
I'm not as surprised now as I would have been a month ago. I think that was very clear, like over the last month, is they don't have secure communications. Part of the reason they haven't taken out telecommunications, some of the infrastructure, I think, is because they need it to do their own battle, essentially. They're not as sophisticated as we thought. Separately, their communications are so revealing and undermine their own disinformation. So, separately, you'll hear them talk about alleged Nazis, random Nazis that are running around Ukraine doing all these horrible things. Right there, you hear them talking about targeting residential areas, what they intend to do to civilian structures, what their battle plan is. And the Ukrainian military is listening to these too. So I'm sure when we see the Ukrainian successes, it's due in large part to just how inept, incompetent, and the inability to communicate by some of these forces.
Well, and also on the other side, and we've said this repeatedly, they were not expecting the Ukrainians to fight as hard or as well as they have. And we've heard a lot now about the morale going down among the Russian forces. Let me play a little bit more of what we heard from those communications. Looking for retreat routes.
Yeah, it's pretty remarkable just to watch, because two things happened. One, I think the more professional, better units thought this would be a cakewalk for them when they invaded Ukraine, particularly down in the south, where they met massive resistance in places like Mykolaiv and taken up to 100 dead, in certain locations, just in single battles. Separately, many of these soldiers, the Russian soldiers, did not even know they were going into an invasion. Some of them that were up in Belarus were issued tickets for a return trip home. The day they're supposed to return, what do? They instead say, hey, drive into Ukraine. Others, at first I thought it was lies with these POWs, Russian POWs saying, hey, we thought this was a training exercise. Now I think they actually believed it was a training exercise. I'm not even sure they knew what they were going to do, where they were going to do it, and why they were going to do it. And then you watch your unit get slaughtered. You watch your tanks get destroyed. You watch your generals, your leaders walk right out and be killed.
What are they doing out on the front lines, the generals?
Yeah, part of the problem for the Russian military is they don't have a non-commissioned officer corps, sergeants, essentially leading the forces down on the ground, which we have amazing NCO corps in the U.S. military. The officers have to go out because they're the professional army. Lots of these folks, they're on contract, a short-term contract, not well paid. Soon, if not now, they'll have more conscripts. So they have to get out there and push them forward, because if they don't, notice he said deserters, it's because they have a problem with that right now. They've probably got many deserters on their hands.
So if you look at the range of things, General McCaffrey, from all these reports that these troops are getting frostbite, that they're hungry, that they don't have the supplies they need, and watching their generals, frankly, dying on the front lines, watching the decimation of some of their forces, these radio transmission gives us a lot of insight into how we got to where we are today, right? But do they tell us anything about where the next week or month might be going?
Well, look, Chris, I've been listening to radio transmissions for 32 years. I've never heard anything like this. It sounds like a bunch of civilians. Logistics stuff goes on an alternative net, not the command net. You don't talk in the clear. Send food. What does that mean? 132 rations for 132 soldiers. Anyway, the whole thing sounds like amateur hour. They've clearly lost command and control at the operational level, the theater level, the command of 250,000 Russian troops. But at battalion level, they're not doing very well either. So the Ukrainians have been hyper-aggressive and smart and incredibly courageous. I mean, confronting T-80 tanks with an NLAW anti-tank missile at 800 yards is really a difficult fight. So the Russians are stymied. Putin doesn't have a clue what to do. I doubt his Russian generals are telling him the truth. The Russian generals getting killed, by the way, it's sort of a good mark of their army. A few dead generals is an indication of a fervor to win. So that's not encouraging. What is encouraging is the total lack of professionalism to handle large formations. I mean, even in the South, as Clint pointed out, that Ukraine just nailed an amphib ship and apparently burned it to the waterline, damaged 2 more, killed the deputy commander of the Black Sea Fleet, killed the 810 Marine Brigade commander. These Russian forces look really in bad shape.
The bravery of the Ukrainian forces, the determination, I mean, they are fighting for their homeland. They are fighting for their families on their ground, in their neighborhoods, in their country. But how do they now, knowing what we know, hearing what we've heard, take the ultimate advantage of where the Russian forces are now and their lack of morale and the fact that they're retreating from places like Kherson?
Well, they're doing pretty well without anybody's advice. At a strategic level, right down to the battlefield, command and control of their forces, the Ukrainians have just been magnificent. A lot of it's an amateur military. It's territorial militia units. It's armed civilians feeding their logistics system to get supplies out of Poland and Romania and get it actually out to the fighting units is simply marvelous. I hate to be overly optimistic, though. This Russian army, Putin's mindset can't retreat. I hope he ends up saying, I'll keep Donbass, the land bridge, Crimea. I'll tell everybody that's my victory. But right now, it doesn't look like that's possible. So we need to help the Ukrainians with some game-changing technology. The U.S. Army's Switchblade 600 anti-armor kamikaze munition, anti-ship missiles, S-300 anti-aircraft missiles. We got to get the M1 tanks. I can't tell you, Chris, how much I worship the M1 tank.
So what's been the argument, General, about not providing them so far, the stuff that you're talking about?
This has gone by phases. Phase 1, he thought he could get in there with the GRU and special ops and some paratroopers and knock the Ukrainian government out of office. That failed. Then he put a tank army into battle, and they stalled in the road, and the Ukrainians beat them there. So we went from the U.S. thinking we had to equip them for counterinsurgency operations to realizing we got to continue. They're now saying they need essentially, I think it was 1,000 or 2,000 missiles a day, anti-tank munitions. So I think Washington, D.C., it's a council of lawyers, the State Department lawyers, the White House lawyers, Justice, Defense. President Biden is going to have to break through that and say, this isn't going to be World War III. It isn't going to be a nuclear war. We got to supply these people with game-changing technology.